Our next speaker will be introduced by Dr. Jaak Pankse.
Well, it's really a delight for me to introduce Colwyn, who I've known for a quarter of a century, and he's known me for maybe 15, 20 years. So how did that happen? That happened, Colwyn, I met you the first time in the mid-1980s in Munich. It was, I think, the second European...
I know Karen, yes. Yeah.
It was the second European Neuroscience Society meeting.
Okay, you can do.
It's me.
I do, yes.
Am I getting an echo here? Are there several microphones on?
Still on.
Anyway, I had gone to the neuroscience meeting there in Munich and, was sitting and enjoying all the kind of very dense neuroscience talks, and all of a sudden there's a symposium and Colwyn presents some of the early stuff on the mother-infant interactions and the dance between the mother and the little one, and I was just totally charmed. I had not heard about it, I had not thought about it much, but I looked at it and I said, boy, this is really worth paying attention to. And since then, I've looked for every opportunity to meet with Colwyn, and I've had quite a few in the last decade or so, but it was a little dry there. Our paths didn't cross very much. But he is such a kind of universal scholar and traveling in many places that I even discover that sometimes we are joint authors without knowing it. Now, that's shocking, but that's the modern age of science. You remember Fred Levin's paper on sleep? Had quite a few authors. In any case, I don't think I have to introduce Colwyn to you. You all know his work, and we all look forward to hearing another summary of it, especially with Colwyn being close to midnight in Scotland. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Right, well, I want to thank Dacia very much for inviting me. It was a surprise, but I'm really happy. I feel that I'm going to be slightly off to one side of the main themes of this conference, because I'm not going to be talking about intensive cooperative care of the physiological organism or the young human being who's very dependent. I'm going to be trying to talk, but the thing that I've been trying to understand is how do human beings share experience in the way that leads to this extravagant world that we live in. We live in a totally artificial world that is very, very ancient. I mean, it's got a history going back thousands of years, and we some of it is stored in language, most of it is stored in a whole range of things that we've constructed and that we think we understand. Now, so my interest now is in trying to understand from babies what they know about this process of sharing experience and how they get involved in it. Now, I think it has important connections with things that have been spoken about by preceding speakers, but I think it raises questions which have not been thought about. And in particular, some years ago, I contrasted the notion of companionship with the notion of attachment, because I think that there's very strong evidence, and I hope that I'll be able to show you some of it, that human beings are born, and perhaps even before birth, they're involved in some kind of friendship rather than simply receiving vital support for their life. Anyway, I'm going to present a lot of material. I had problems getting organized because my laptop failed. I've had a wonderful laptop replacement operation since I arrived here. And I've scurried around, put a PowerPoint together. But I'm going to be presenting a lot of text which I don't want you to worry about too much. I'm going to make a PDF available to Dacia so that you will be able to read this later as an article. But I do particularly want to have time to show some crucial videos and some sound recordings which I think carry the main message. Now, is this... Where do I point it? This is a very strange painting by Titian. When he was 93 years of age, he painted this picture with the Garden of Eden, and Eve is receiving, I don't know, the apple of knowledge from a baby, from a child. And I think it's very interesting, by the way, Alan, both of them using their left hands, left arms. The baby is handing the apple with its right arm. I don't know what that means in terms of cerebral lateralization, but I think that what Adam is doing is say, hold it, baby, we've got to regulate this. He's got a very cautious posture. And now I use this to illustrate how we have an intuitive desire to share creativity. And this is all transmitted by rhythms of body movement of one kind or another. And I like to emphasize that the cultural knowledge is passed on as a poetic process, which can be made rational for practical purposes. And technology, science, and all of these things that we elaborate for mastering the world depend upon forms of communication that are intuitive and rhythmic and expressive and artistic. Now, this is I don't know, does that come out clearly with the amount of light in the room? Or is it very faint? Could we lower the lights? That would make a difference. This baby is only half an hour old. It's showing complete mastery of its body in a clinic in India where there are no fancy medical procedures. The baby's born very healthy, and it's being amused by a visitor to the clinic. I hope we can get the room lights down so that we can see the picture, because all of my pictures will be in difficulty. Okay, I don't know why it's coming out so opaque, but the baby is oriented towards this red ball with its eyes, its nose, its two hands and one foot. And what's important is that the ball is being moved by a lady who is playing a game with the half-hour-old baby. The baby is very sensitive to the fact that the ball is moving in a teasing, playful kind of way, and that's what attracts the baby. Now, the same woman was entertaining this baby, trying to get it to imitate, and she was poking her tongue out. And the baby struggles, looks away, and then turns around and pokes its tongue out. We're very interested in hand movements. This baby also, less than an hour old, and she's playing with her hand in front of the baby. Now, it's interesting that the baby struggles with its left hand and then turns away and switches and imitates with the right hand. I'm actually emphasizing these left-right things because I want Alan to moderate a little bit his insistence on the right hemisphere in very early infancy. We are interested in the fact that there are movement interactions between the mother's body and the baby's body before birth, and this is the foundation of a development of an intimacy of communication by all sorts of by all modalities, which then undergoes systematic age-related developments which are generated within the child, and to which the parents respond, other people respond. What we're working towards is a description of the human person from birth, with human characteristics that are adaptively prepared for cultural learning. And I want to replace the notion of joint attention with the notion of shared experience, and I mean experience at all levels, from a primary embodied proprioceptive and visceral sharing, right through various degrees of formality and playfulness, up to informative sharing of experience, and finally, imperative sharing of experience where you're told what to think, which is what happens at school. Now, the interesting background to this, and the thing that we're concentrating on now, is the musicality, and I don't mean music, I mean musicality of the movements. And I'll try to give you very clear evidence of that. Here's a film of a baby in Japan, 10-month-old baby in Japan, squatting like a little Japanese can. Now, can we... That is an ironic laugh. He's asking for it. She doesn't get it. Ask again. Come on. Now, isn't this familiar? I don't know how many of you know Japanese, but it's very familiar. That's enough, you see. Okay, now this is my granddaughter, one of my granddaughters who's 5 years old, dancing around the living room like a perfectly trained dancer. She never had any dancing lessons of any kind. She's dancing to fiddle music played by her uncle, French dance music that she's never heard before. She's dancing with her grandmother, holding a doll made by her great-grandmother. And this is 4 generations of human music making, all in one picture. And what's important is that this ability to use your human body with the music in a musical way is completely intuitive. Particularly, this little girl really seems gifted in that way. Now, Daniel Stern has just produced a book which pulls together his ideas on what he calls vitality dynamics. And he's been insisting, from his studies of play between mothers and infants, that we need a thorough revision of the notions of the kind of emotional relationship between a baby and a mother. And he has described the different ways in which the voice, the body, the hand gestures and touch and so on share dynamic principles. And he's been trying to classify these, and he talks about the different qualities of movement. Now, I've recolored these so that the very faint ones are yellow, and the very powerful ones are red, and the intermediate ones are blue. And Dan is making the point that they're very strange words because they're not naming anything. They're adverbs or adjectives. They're not emotions or motivational states, pure perception, sensations. They have no modality. They are not cognitions or acts, as they have no goal state and no specific means. They fall in between all the cracks. They're felt experience of force. They're shapes of expressive movement. They concern how, the manner and style, and not what or why. Now, this how is powerfully communicated by apparently completely innate principles that are shared. And I think that most of the principles of these vitality affects in humans are a product of our unique body with its many, many moving parts and its possibilities for polyrhythmia. We walk along on 2 legs and we gesticulate while we're talking, and we speak with our lips, and then we move our head around. We're doing many things at once. I think we have extravagant mobility compared to any other animal. Many animals move brilliantly and are very graceful, and some of them can move very fast, but humans can do so many more things. Now, Whitehead, the philosopher, says culture is activity of thought and receptiveness to beauty and humane feeling. Scraps of information have nothing to do with it. Now, he's being quite challenging. By the way, I have to in this day and age, I have to quote and make another quote from Whitehead. He said, "Universities are places of creativity, not productivity, and their product should not be measured." Yes, ironic laughter. By the way, the definition of ironic laughter I got from Alvarez. There's a pause, and then you go, and that's exactly what the Japanese baby did. It sounds like you think you're clever, don't you? Now, so the point is that these movements, right from birth, in fact, even to some extent from before birth, these movements are shared joyfully, perhaps, and they're beautiful. This is cultural learning as described by Barbara Rogoff, cross-cultural. This happens to be her family. These are her 3 children, and these 2 very unlike youngsters are twins. But notice the movements of the little girl when her elder sister is making the castle. She's part of the action. She's involved. This is what's called intent participation learning. It involves an enormous sensibility for the timing and the intensity of movement and the sharing of consciousness that is possible. Now, we are interested in developing a theory of how the human motives grow. Not just how they're cultivated, but how they grow from within the child. And I think that the important thing is the notion that the emotions that regulate these are really emotions that evaluate the quality of shared experience. And we're particularly impressed with the importance of artistic behaviours. Now, it's interesting that there's a growing awareness, not only of embodied psychology, but a notion that we live from the beginning in intense second-person relationships. Now, the very important book on this has been written recently by Vasudevi Reddy, who has challenged the attempt of science to understand the mind, either by introspection or first-person position, or by objective observation of behavioural outcome, product. She says that from the very beginning, all of our activities and experiences are in relation to other people, potentially or actually. Now, cultural emotions, I think, the core emotions of cultural life are pride and shame. And I want to talk about that in the context of developing infant knowledge and experience. I think this has clinical importance. I mean, we've been hearing a lot about the effects on the brain of poor maternal care, lack of proper nourishment, cruelty. You hear lots of things about the negative effects of experience on the brain. But I think that the brain is designed to be involved in careful regulation of the risks and benefits of being a human person with other human persons. And I think that the emotions of pride and shame, far from being secondary emotions that are built up by experience, are absolutely fundamental primary emotions. Now I want to show this slide here because it's not that far away in Canada. These are Beaver Indians, and I use this as an illustration of pride. That little toddler is intensely proud of the clothes her mother made. These are hunter-gatherers. They had very little technology. They didn't even have canoes. He's a beaver hunter. And they lived in very small communities. They had all of the characteristics that we were talking about being typical of early human evolution, hunter-gatherer communities, very small communities, very tight cooperation. But what I want you to look at them, they have no money, no technology, they're illiterate. Look at their health and the well-being of that child. That's a complete human situation. Here is the 6-month-old baby that we know very well. I'll try to present her later to you. She's sitting on her father's knee at home in Edinburgh, and the mother was standing behind the person with the camera. She said, "Clap handies." And Emma did that with a look of pride, tremendous pride. Her father is showing pride. And by the way, on the shelf you can see he's proud of being able to play darts in the pub. There's a 6-month-old facing a really nice person who knows a lot about children, but she's a stranger, and she's trying to be friendly with the little girl. The girl is showing her what she thinks of her. Now, we see from 6 to 7 months, babies show a very strong sense of this fearful rejection of strangers who come to speak to them. And when we were doing this research, one of my students was often a stranger for babies, and he said, it's a dreadful job. He said, baby after baby showed they didn't like him. And it was so hard for him to take. Now, we're interested in the notion that the different systems of movement in the body, with objects and with people, have their own emotional regulations. We've been looking very hard at the way movements are regulated by experience in these 3 domains. Within the body, in relation to physical objects, as studied, say, by Piaget, and in interaction with other people, because they're capable of responding as people. And we come to the conclusion, I learnt this from Theodorakis, the Greek musician. He said that there were 2 rites in ancient Greece, Apollonian and Dionysian. The Dionysian ones, you throw your clothes off, run in the woods, drink, make love. And he said all the arts come from the Dionysian rites. The Apollonian rites have to do with measurement, technical proficiency, and so on, and efficient use of language. The Apollonian rites lead to technique, the Dionysian lead to art. Now, these, as Theodorakis said, these have to be balanced in human cultural life. They must be balanced. You can't have just technological brilliance. You've got to have the arts and the humanity that they include. Now, I have actually taken this map and put Jacques' emotions on it, and I've added pride and shame. I don't quite know where to put them, but they've got to do with the power or the weakness of the ability to share experience with other people and their appreciation of what you seem to know. Now, I think that I haven't done them in capitals. I'm very sorry, Jacques. I mean, I didn't do them in capitals, but I should have done. But these are, I believe in them. I know they're real, and I think they should be situated in this map of emotions. I think you haven't rejected it because we published a paper in which we used it together. I like referring back to Sherrington, and I urge all of you to read The Integrative Action of the Nervous System when he defines exteroceptive and proprioceptive. He doesn't use the word alteroceptive. That's a word that I've used. But he invented the words exteroception, proprioception, visceroception, and so on, as well as many others, including synapse. Now, this is a 1-year-old sitting on her mother's knee, and the mother is reading a telephone bill, and Vasily is reading her book. And because the mother is intently regarding the telephone bill, the baby turns and points to the telephone bill and says, blah, 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 which is jargon, not actually saying words, just making an utterance. But the utterance had a definite tone about it. It sounded like, you're spending too much on the telephone. And what did her mother do? Her mother gave her the telephone bill and she sat on the floor and read it. Why? Because of the intense interest her mother was showing in that object. Now, 1-year-olds will do this. They try to do what you are doing, and they try to know what you are knowing, and that's preparatory to giving things names. That's called joint attention. But there's a long process of development before that, and it begins at birth. The baby's head is much smaller than an adult head, but it's got all the parts. Many of them are immature, but the structures are there. Now, I'm going to show you proto-conversation. One of the important factors in the initiation of proto-conversation, and I'll be giving you examples of it, is this around the visual system has to develop very fast because there's been no chance to practice vision before birth. There's a very rapid development of the visual processes in the first few weeks. The baby can see from the moment of birth. We saw that with the half-hour-old baby tracking a ball. But the intensity of fixation and the ability to discriminate grows very fast in the first few weeks. And by the end of the first month or in the second month, The baby shows this intense regard at the mother's face. And then we get this system, which Jacques has, I think Alan already showed this picture. We've used this picture to talk about the complexity of the communicative system between mother and baby. How many parts of the body? By the way, what the babies develop, okay, they're very weak in their body, human babies, but not in their face, their voice, their eyes, their head, and their hands. Those parts of the body are very, very powerfully precocious and very sensitive to their equivalents in other people. Now, we've charted the first 18 months of life, and we've got these age-related changes. Every one of those curves has empirical data behind it of one kind or another. I'm talking about the orange area now around the second month. In 1968, we began a study at Harvard where we looked at mothers and babies in an interactive situation contemporaneously with two other people who were discovering this. We were really finding out about mother-infant communication. There was nothing about it in the literature. One person was Mary Catherine Bateson, who coined the expression proto-conversation. She gave a brilliant description of it. The other one was Daniel Stern, who was looking at 3-month-old babies playing with their mothers. Now, we found, one of the first things we found illustrated by these pictures is that the mother of a young baby engaged with the baby imitates the baby and follows the baby's expressions. I'm now going to show you an example that we've studied in great detail. This is little Laura is 3 months old here on the mother's knee. Her sister Louise is trying to butt into the conversation, and the father is very proud, sitting on the outside, watching his family. Now, we studied Laura and her mother in the lab in a situation where we could record their behaviors very, very closely and record both the visual and audible behaviors. She looks at her mother intently, she smiles, she coos with a trumpet, and she waves her right hand. Martin Richards and I found that babies raise their right hand above their shoulder more often when they're making an utterance than the left hand. They make their utterances with their right hand as very young babies. Their announcements. Now, I'm going to show you, I hope this plays for me. I'm going to play for you 27 seconds of this proto-conversation.
Come on. Again. Come on then. Oh yes, is that right? Well, tell me some more then. Tell me some more then. Oh, come on. Goo. Goo.
That 27 seconds has produced a big book about that thick. And it's called Communicative Musicality. And it was analysed by a musical acoustic expert. And he produced these spectrographs. Now, I'll play them quickly. I haven't got much time, but this is the first 10 seconds, and that line is middle C.
Come on. Again. Come on then. That's clever. Oh yes, is that right?
The musician was absolutely astonished that he could mark 1.5 second bar lines, and that the baby was respecting the bar line when the mother left a space for the baby, and that there's a rhythm, and that the pitch is oscillating around middle C. The next 10 seconds they cooperate in rhythmic phrases.
Well, tell me some more then. Tell me some more then. Oh, come on.
And the final 10 seconds.
Come on. Goo.
Pause.
Goo.
Now, he did a pitch plot. The pitch plot shows that the mother's voice... I'd like it louder, if you can make it a bit louder. The pitch plot shows that the mother's voice goes through the octave above middle C. And he divided this up into 4 sections. There's an introduction where the mother is requesting the baby to respond.
Come on. Again. Come on then. That's clever.
Then the baby responds, and the mother is excited.
Oh yes, is that right? Well, tell me some more then.
And then there's the climax where they synchronize.
Oh, come on.
And then the resolution.
Goo. Goo.
This is a wave of excitement or a story in sound, which has an introduction, a development, a climax, and a resolution. That is what you heard in the Japanese nursery songs. The 4 lines of the song have those characteristics. He studied the quality of the voice. I'll skip that. It's pitched at middle C, and recently there's been a flute discovered, which is 35,000 years old. And when it's played by a modern human being, it has a pitch range of the octave above middle C, and the song that is played by a modern human being, of course, an anthropologist or archaeologist, it resembles very much, if you plot it on the same scale, the communication with Laura. So middle C is somehow part of our anatomy, and the octave above middle C is a storytelling range of the voice. Now, Stephen Malik defined the parameters of communicative musicality as pulse, quality, and narrative, and his definition of narrative is extremely important. I think this has importance for every field where you're trying to understand how human beings interact emotionally, intellectually, linguistically. Doesn't matter how they're interacting. He said that narrative is the regulation of pulse and quality which allows 2 persons to share a sense of purpose in passing time. Now this depends upon a common temporal language between babies and adults. And we know a lot about that. We know that there's a biochronological principle which gives babies, they're born with human biochronology. Now, I want to show you a couple of films. I'm going to skip through this. You can read all this. But I do want you to recognize this book. This book has a chapter by me and Yark, but it also has chapters by Ellen Dissanayake, who does wonderful work on what she calls art and intimacy. She finds the origin of the arts in mother-infant communication. It's interesting that archaeologists now say that the distinguishing characteristic of Homo sapiens compared with Homo neanderthalensis is not technology, not manual dexterity, but art. Creation of pictorial art and evidence of musical art. These are the things that were characteristic of Homo sapiens when they were coexistent with Neanderthals. Now, this book is an attempt by musicologists and brain scientists and people studying mothers and infants to put together evidence about the nature of human communication described as musicality. Now, this is, by the way, 30 years later. That's Laura on the right, and she now has her own child, but we'll skip that. Now, I'm going to just show you a couple more. You can look at all this later. This is the evidence for the temporal periodicities being the same in adults as in babies, with newborns. Now, one thing I do want to say is that this 27 seconds is a physiological phenomenon. It's a parasympathetic cycle of heart regulation and respiration, which can be recognized whether you're awake or asleep. It's the foundation for the sense of a piece of a story or an argument. And it's an important part of linguistic grammar, of course. It goes on whether you're awake or asleep throughout your life. And it can be shared. And here's an example of sleeping with mother. This is a 1-year-old child sleeping with her mother who did believe in breastfeeding and did believe in her baby sleeping with her. But they're both asleep, but they're sharing these rhythms. They'll be sharing the rhythms of breathing and heartbeat, and there are certain electrical activities in the brain which will also be synchronized. Now, I think that time period is a very important unit of human experience, and that we should think about. Now, we know something about the preparation for this dialogues and so on in the anatomy of a human being before birth. I want to just present you. I like that picture, by the way. That's the daughter of a musician, and he was most pleased that she looked like a conductor. But in fact, she looks like a French chef who's just made a superb sauce. Because her 2 hands, her lips and tongues and eyes are all synchronized in this wonderful expression of delight. and she's only 6 hours old. Now, babies, by the way, do try to make speech articulations far before they can. Yes, I'm sorry. Can I show a couple of short films and then I'll stop? Because these ones, I don't think you'll ever forget them. This is Emma Shinash, by the way, the Hungarian girl who studied neonatal imitation, and she gets babies to do things like that. She also studies their heart rate changes when they're imitating, or what she discovered, provoking. They repeat the action to get you to imitate. Newborns. And here's a baby admiring its right hand and then imitating her, and then looking at her and getting her to imitate. Okay, this is a baby born 3 months premature, and the pediatrician in charge of the intensive care unit wanted to study kangarooing. So he had the mother put the baby from birth, from 3 months premature, inside her shirt, but then the mother had to go away and have an operation, and the father took over, and he was brilliant. But I want to play this film for you, and I want you, could you raise the volume, because the sounds are very faint, but I want you to hear the baby's communication with the father at 2 months premature. Nope, sorry, it'll come up. I think. Okay, now this is a noisy ward and there's a lot of extraneous stuff, but two things I want you to notice. First of all, the father is very good at this and very proud.
Nasera's mother is still too weak after the operation to come and visit, but father comes every day and kangaroos with Nasera. Here she is 3 weeks older and already has plump cheeks. She is under her father's t-shirt and can already converse well with him.
Weakly, louder, and then he speaks in. Now this was plotted by Stephen Malik also, and the fast exchange is syllable frequency. It forms a group that corresponds to a phrase, and the interval between the first and last sound is longer, which is what phoneticians call final lengthening. When you pronounce a phrase, the last syllable is longer than the others. And this is a 2-month premature baby and a man doing a linguistic phrase. And then there are pauses of 4-second pauses between the sounds that the baby makes when the father is distracted and not replying. These are phrase length intervals. The baby is calling him first weakly, then strongly, and then again, and he replies. So the baby has a sense of timing that corresponds with that of an adult. Newborn babies can move their hands in synchrony with adult speech. Now, there's one other film, then I'm stopping. This is an extraordinary example of intermodal coordination. This is a very famous Swedish baby song. The baby is born totally blind. It's a 5-month-old baby, and the mother is singing a nursery song. And I want you to watch very carefully the baby's left hand. The first song is about a squirrel. Now that's the end of the first song. The second song the baby recognises and laughs.
Mors lilla Ulla I skogen
This is the first verse. Each verse has 4 lines with rhyming. This is the climax. That's the resolution. Now watch the second verse. Watch the hand. Okay, well I'll stop now, but I'll just tell you the end of this story because the professor of music saw that, and he's a conductor and composer. And he said, yes, the baby's conducting very well, just like a professional conductor, making the correct gestures for the phrase and so on, and coming to an end like that. And he said, with some anticipation. So we plotted it very carefully, and he was right. The baby was leading the mother by 1/3 of a second. She was the lead dancer. Now, nobody knew the baby was doing this until we saw the film. The mother didn't know, neither did Professor Gunilla Preisler, who was studying this blind baby. She studies deaf and blind babies. Now, there's a couple of things that are interesting. It is the left hand, motivated by the right hemisphere. The baby is blind. The right hand is making rather random fiddling movements on the chest. Sorry, this way. Which is right? This way. Doing this kind of movement, while the left hand is doing these beautiful conducting movements. Now, Selma Freiberg suggested that blind babies make more hand movements than sighted babies as a kind of compensation. But what's important for neuroscience and for psychology is that this baby is making an intuitive translation between the story of the voice and the story of a human hand. Now, human hands are absolutely unique in their capacity to express, to make stories. And I want to link this with Merlin Donald's idea that human beings began with what he called mimesis before they had language. That is, they used the body to make stories, to make representations before they had words, as babies do. Now, I've tried to put a lot of things together. I've incorporated these ideas in 2 papers, one on new ideas about attachment, and I talked about companionship rather than attachment, because I think what babies are showing here is motivation to share knowledge and experience, skill and knowledge. And I think that the other is a very large review chapter on regulation and stress in the Handbook of Child Psychopathology, in which we were asked by Cicchetti to review regulation and stress from conception to the age of 2. As a ridiculous request, but we did it. That is, I got 3 young scientists to help me do it, and we did it. And they were very clever. We came to the conclusion that the most important function to consider when understanding regulation and stress is cooperation. So we looked at cooperation between the mother's body and the fetus or the embryo all the way through, and then after birth, we looked at cooperation by psychological means. And we felt that there is a process of mutual regulation to achieve cooperation. Now, I hope that makes some sense. Okay, I'll stop.
Thank you so much. We'll take a couple questions and then we'll have Jay Belsky give us some discussing comments in his own perspective, and then we'll have general discussion. Microphone, I guess you have to stand up.
I just want to know if you are aware of the work of Dr. Emmy Pickler from Budapest.
Sorry, I can't understand.
Dr. Emmy Pickler's work from Budapest. She was a pediatrician in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s.
Sorry, it's too much echo. I can't follow. Maybe without the mic even.
Okay. Dr. Emmy Pickler was a Hungarian pediatrician who
Yes.
did research on natural movement development of infants.
Yes.
Do you know about that?
Yes, I do. There's a wonderful book by, I think it's called Buzaki, I think is his name, on rhythms of the brain. By the way, I mean, Oliver Sacks has said music is how the brain works. And why I refer to Sherrington is that Sherrington was absolutely convinced that the sense of body time, proprioceptive time, was what made integrative action of the nervous system possible. I mean, he said that the reflexes exist to be coordinated, and that's why he called it the integrative action. And there's only one way to integrate. You have to have a common time frame. And all the parts of the body must be in one time. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what the different bits were doing. And so I think I think time is probably the one thing that cognitive psychology has totally neglected, along with movement. But time is the fatal one. And I think the fact that linguists study the structure of language as text and don't consider the temporal patterns involved, that means they can't relate it to other forms of human movement, like music. And that's why somebody called, well, I dare not say Peeve and Stinker, Steven Pinker says music is of no evolutionary value whatsoever, it's just biological cheesecake. Now, that's the consequence of being too linguistic. I mean, we are trying to suggest that there is something going on in human minds and human bodies, especially in interacting human bodies, which is common to propositional thought, to linguistic grammar, and to the organization of consciousness in a stream which works in the present but looks to the future and remembers the past. And that's exactly how Adam Smith described music. He said music is in the present, but it's also in the imagination and in memory. And I think that these dynamic things are part of the process by which consciousness becomes memory. And, yep.
I really enjoyed your talk. You mentioned second-person psychologies, and you're discussing music now. I'm wondering if there's a way we can bring in the place of the wild other, of wild animals. The hunter-gatherer family you showed us, the name was beaver.
Yes,
the Swedish songs were bear and squirrels.
Yeah.
And when it comes to music, it seems to me that's a great example. It's not a blank slate, as Steven Pinker says, but it's something humans discovered, not invented. There was a living music in the habitat, bird song, and animals that we were attuning ourselves to that get deeply into us and into our socialization practices. And
yes, I don't think that we acquired music that way, but I think that there is an evolutionary continuity. There's some beautiful work on the evolution of music now, wonderful work, and one particular expert on songs of gibbons, Bjorn Merker, who contributed to our book, says that the one thing that is distinctive about humans is the capacity for creating an infinite number of stories rather than a limited repertoire of narrative-like behaviors like whales can do and many birds can do. But he also makes a very important point about vocalization in humans. We have what he calls plastic song, which occurs also in some birds, but in no other primates. That is, we have the capacity to learn an infinite array of sounds and articulate them with our voice. And that is not true of any other primate. The closest would be gibbons, the mother gibbons teach their daughters how to sing, but they have a limited song. The males do some baseline stuff, which is very boring, but they do choruses. And I think that what we're calling musicality, what Stephen Malik has defined as musicality, we think is uniquely human. Although it has many, many sort of foundations in rhythmic animal movement and in the use of sound by animals, including invertebrates, of course, who do chorusing and singing together.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Just one small last question. Do you have any insight what the evolutionary foundations of the musical octave are?
Well, it's true that every species that uses sound for communication has a matching auditory system that matches in other words, what have evolved together is the sound making and the sound perceiving. Now, I think,
do they have self-similarity across octaves?
I mean, an octave is a physical phenomenon. And so it must affect the hearing of other species as well. But
no one's ever shown the self-similarity across different octaves.
I don't know the answer, but I mean there is an answer. I would just have to find the right person to tell it to me. I mean, I think the answer is known, but I think that the fact that, I mean, what we found, we studied depressed mothers' voices. Depressed mothers' voices drop in the octave below middle C, and they make the baby's voices drop in the octave below middle C too, so the babies become depressed. And when the mother is cured of postnatal depression, her voice jumps up to the octave above middle C. We've looked at mothers with bipolar psychosis, and they use monotonous, repetitive, cyclic forms of speech, which are very, very tedious. The babies struggle to be therapists for them, trying to make them more musical. By the way, this links in very much with music therapy. Music therapy is a very powerful form of dealing with many kinds of disorders, which is denied by the medical establishment, because they say there's no randomized controlled trials, and so they don't accept it. But there's a lot of good work now on the use of music therapy for autism, schizophrenia, Rett syndrome, ADHD, anything. I mean, you talk about play, but it can be musical play.
Very good. Thank you very much.